Hi, I'm Chris McLean from Stonechair Capital. Earlier, I had the opportunity to sit down with Dan Klinck of East African Power and hear how 10 years of working under the radar has them now breaking out as others are falling away. Let's dive into that discussion with Dan of East African Power and learn more about energy and Africa. Well, Dan, thanks so much for joining me. I'm so eager to hear more about what East African Power is about and what you're about and the motivation that you have for power in Africa. So with that, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit of a history of who you are and how you got into Africa.
That's a great question. Thanks, Chris. It's been a decade for me being based in Kigali, Rwanda, which is such a spectacular, beautiful country. And I didn't come to Rwanda with the intention to get into renewable energy. I came in to follow my background in investment banking, looking to do impact investments. So had stumbled along a run-of-the-river project similar to the background that we have here, and what began from one project a decade ago, which was Rwanda's largest IPP project, 438 kilowatts, called Musarara, really began this kind of love affair with small-scale hydro and solar power. So a decade back of being able to bring a project to fruition certainly led to involvement in the largest solar power project in East Africa, in Agahozo Shalom, in 2014 from a local EPC side of our work, which led to Rawaza completion, a 3 megawatt, to Rubagabaga, which was the first containerized. And one thing to the next, you end up finding yourself being a fully integrated renewable energy developer, doing development, finance, construction, the engineering services. My background, I'm from Sherbrooke, Quebec, and basically had followed my lovely bride now, with her impact work in Rwanda, and then had found myself and really have found a great home in Kigali and Rwanda. I really view the country as a gateway, or Africa Light, of getting across the continent, and the lessons learned, and of course being a developer in any aspect of renewables is a significant challenge. So Rwanda really presents an excellent place of doing business, a great soft landing pad, and has really become kind of the gateway for our work across Africa. So 95% of our future projects are beyond the borders of Rwanda. We find ourselves where we've been able to bring a nice portfolio of projects to fruition, but we have a number of kind of late stage projects and about 50 projects in various stages of the pipeline, pre-development, development, financing stage, that we have under management across 10 countries. So Kigali is the home base, and am finding myself back and forth from Ottawa and Kigali, of course, raising funds, raising awareness of what we're doing. Really the passion is not so much about kilowatts, but what kilowatts can do. So we're super jazzed up about what SDG 7 is. It's all about bringing universal access of clean, reliable, and affordable power. We have a super passion for the small scale, the 1 to 10 megawatt utility scale projects. We of course we find ourselves doing medium size and some of the mini size projects, but that's a bit of the background to what has evolved into East African Power, certainly we're finding ourselves to be a company that's well positioned for hitting 100 projects or 1 gigawatt by 2030. We have 15 people on our management team, over 100 full-time staff, and just a real enthusiastic group of renewable energy engineers, developers, and financiers who are excited about bringing up kilowatts. So that's a bit of the background to our journey and my personal journey in leading and working with this company. Thanks for the question.
Wow, that's a whole bundle of things to unpack. Absolutely. It sounds like you're not a man that likes to sit on his laurels, for sure.
No, not at all.
So one of the biggest criticisms that
we and you probably find over time is the risk versus reward, perceived risk versus actual risk. How do you find doing business in Rwanda as a home base?
Great question. In certainly my so many misconceptions coming in. So our viewpoint has significantly changed. Not every place in the world has its own risks, and certainly people are quite initially assuming that there's going to be tremendous amount of corruption and bribery necessary, and it'll be impossible to follow all of your World Bank and IFC guidelines. And actually, it's just been an amazing and pleasant experience finding ourselves in Rwanda. It's been over a decade, not one bribe asked. It's been super transparent, very easy place to do business. It is much easier to incorporate and do business in Rwanda than it is in Canada. I think Canada has a lot to learn, and I think a lot of the kind of Western mindset of having to teach Africa how to do business. There's so many different ways there where Rwanda can teach Canada and the West of how to do business efficiently, effectively, and being able to wipe out corruption. So our kind of viewpoint, and of course Rwanda's story is not exactly all of the stories in the geographies that we work in, and I won't kind of put names to specific places, but certainly as kind of a key operating base, it is a bit of kind of Africa light on the doing business index. Rwanda's number 2 ranking, and it just kind of goes to show the amount of kind of effort and depth of the kind of trade not aid philosophy that has been led by His Excellency Kagame. And he's really put in a warm and inviting place for investors to come in, especially those that are looking to do development across Africa and keep Kigali as your home operating base. And most developers have kind of positioned themselves in Cape Town, which is so beautiful, or Joburg or Nairobi, and wonderful places. But actually, I've got a young family, a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and our kind of work and work and home life. Kigali is a very enjoyable and beautiful place to live in. It's super safe, one of the safest places in the world. It's just absolutely one of the cleanest cities in the world also. And as you can see from my background here, but there's a lot of kind of beautiful places to travel to. So it's a small country. It's quite elegant. Needless to say that I think that it lends itself that when you're trying to draw in and being a leading engineering services business in renewables, we need to attract the best kind of global and regional talent. Actually, Kigali is a wonderful magnet for that. So I think that's been our experience to date.
So therein actually is another sort of question that we all find. It's to say, are there the resources, mostly human resources, to be able to continue with the growth profile that the energy sector is underway? Would you address some of your issues in dealing with that?
Well, it is quite a challenge, and especially as a company that is aiming and driving to be growing to 200 to 300 people, and endeavoring that the company is actually completely African run, managed, and led over the course of the next kind of 3 to 5 years, and a company that is pushing for gender and diversity. And so what we're finding, and there's different departments, but of course in engineering, there's been a lack of support from institutions of supporting female engagement in the sector. But what we found through many different kind of programs, we've seen kind of USAID, WIRE program, Women in Renewable Energy Network, and we've seen a number of different programs that have kind of come up to facilitate some of that capacity building for like locally drawn resources. And initially, a lot of the assumptions were, we're not going to be able to find this talent. And whether that's from looking for hydrologists or geotechnical, but actually, while Rwanda is quite small, regionally, we're able to find resources in Uganda and Zimbabwe and Kenyans and Tanzanians on our team. And we're finding that quite regionally, we're able to fill some of the gaps. And of course, our objective is we're bringing in a lot of international talent. We have over kind of 20 international experts within our own network, 7 fully engaged who have more than 30 years of experience in hydropower. And so, coming to EAP is a little bit like coming to a university. So we do have that kind of capacity building that's ongoing. And certainly a lot of the stumbling blocks, yes, it's the cost of capital, which is like very prohibitive in projects, and that lack of human capital. So it really takes investments in that, and especially as EAP is a company that is aiming to be around. We don't kind of build projects to flip them. We engage in projects to stay with them for the full life of their kind of 25-year concession in a build, operate, transfer. So we try to make our company really to offer careers and development. So those that are coming in as interns to junior engineers to senior engineers to different directors. So we're trying to attract in that type of talent. We have a great pool of people who have been with us 5 to 10 years. Who see it as a place of learning. So it's one of those areas where you just need to invest and have that type of philosophy when you approach technical development work in solar and hydropower engineering.
I find it very encouraging that there is, we'll call it an international businessman as yourself that acknowledges the fact that jobs on the continent can be generated and need to be generated with and for Africans in their space, and that businesses can be grown from that. It's something that, as you well know, is that it's not a case of, we can just transfer skill sets. It's no, let's grow skill sets and go forward from there. And in your outlook as a company is quite refreshing to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And what's interesting and where we haven't found some of the talent locally, sometimes when we look at kind of a little bit more kind of in depth, we're looking for kind of seasoned energy, let's say a CFO, that has 20 years of experience, at least 10 in energy. And you might not find that necessarily like in Rwanda, but we're finding like Rwanda is a great kind of melting pot for our headquarters, and of course, given kind of COVID and the fact that we're operating in more than 10 countries, we're a bit more online or tap into larger resources. But when we've reached out in for the, and address some of the, gender gaps that we've had in our senior management team, and reaching out for a new chief investment officer and a chief financial officer. We've had a great, team member join from Zimbabwe, and of course from Kenya, that has come to incorporate in our team. So what might be lacking in Kigali, which is a smaller city, we are certainly able to kind of tap into the COMESA and other greater East African community.
Now let's delve into a little bit the projects that you're working on. The item that gets asked a lot in the financial community and the development community, the banking community is, what size do you have? Are you at, financial close or, FID? Are you there? Some of the project sizes you mentioned would be considered small. They're not a GERD dam, an Inga dam, a big giant multinational project. Can you talk about how you've experienced, we'll call it the size of projects you're at, and what that means to the financial community, and how you've dealt with that along the way?
There's a lot to unpack there.
Your turn.
Thanks for the great question. I mean, certainly we hold to a philosophy that small is beautiful, and small is beautiful kind of lends itself to kind of the risk profile and opportunities in this kind of 1 to 10 megawatt space. One of the kind of key issues, of course, that we face is the profile of smaller projects don't necessarily hit the radars, because the DFIs or the cheap money or the economies of scale come when the financial institutions are able to bring in 20, 30, upwards of 50 million into a single project. Truly, that's where the greater resources lie with regards to more affordable capital. And so certainly it's on larger projects, you're able to see that the cost of capital is quite a bit lower, but it's of course during the development process that the financial institutions they're getting that economies of scale, because it's quite costly and cost prohibitive to bring in and run all of the lenders' due diligence into projects and project finance, whereas a smaller project doesn't necessarily need that level of scrutiny. And then what we're seeing as a trend in the industry is being able to unpack and mitigate some of that risk by investing into platforms. So whereas institutions in whether it's kind of equity or on the debt levels, we'll see them wanting to invest in, let's say, a portfolio of 5 to 8 projects in a specific kind of geography or technology, in having kind of the risk mitigated of doing those projects in a little bit of often an all equity refinance type of model. And so certainly we've seen innovations with how financiers address these smaller projects. There's plenty of equity capital out there. There's plenty of debt capital that's out there. They just can't find a home. And one of the reasons why they can't find a home is that they're all looking for that PPA level document that's like super and 100% bankable. And often that money is chasing the same types of projects on tendered projects also. So what we see in the small is beautiful range is that not only is it a way of kind of approaching or working alongside financiers in the later development stages, perhaps in a pre-PPA or in a pre-financial close stage of the project, is that there's kind of more opportunities for financiers to look into those types of projects. And certainly where we find our expertise is building in that kind of world-class profile, that bankability. So it's one thing for a project to be technically viable, but is it truly bankable? Have the documents been done correctly? And so there's a lot of money out there, but it's chasing very few projects. There really actually is a lack of developers in the space, and perhaps that lends itself to the historical strategies of developers to only develop 1 or 2 projects at a time, and within a specific technology and in a specific geography. So that lack of kind of risk or diversification, it leads those institutions to try to find one-off projects from local developers who may not have that experienced track record. So if you look around anywhere in East African power pool, Southern African power pool, or West African power pool, there's only a small handful of developers who've been able to, successfully, complete a pipeline and a track record of developing projects. So this is where it's not, is the money out there, but are the projects out there, and are they at those stages?
It's interesting that you that last statement you made. I recall hearing Larry Fink at the OECD Developing Markets event here, I'm going to say a month and a half, 2 months ago, where his statement was, there are not enough impact projects for us to invest in. They've since gone on to create a fund, a $500 million fund with one of the European DFIs to try and create impact projects, which is interesting because, that whole trying to seed to have larger projects for consolidation for private equity to come in, as you said, and refinance and take through. With somebody like yourself who's been, in the game for 10 years now, how do you find, we'll call it the consolidation of projects as a theory of change going forward, or an opportunity going forward? That whole small projects aren't profitable, but if I create a portfolio of them, all of a sudden I'm attractive. How do you balance that interesting schism that exists there?
Very good. Well, I think it lends itself to EAPs. Our strategy to kind of work and tailor project portfolios specifically with the financier and impact investor in mind. We're in 5 years ago, you might have been looking at projects which had a kind of 20 to 25% risk return, but the risk has come down. And because the risk has come down in small hydro, so have the returns. And then, of course, what we've seen as technology has advanced, we've seen that the cost of doing these projects has kind of driven down. The other thing that we've noticed is that the equity IRR expectations have also come down. So we're seeing small hydropower projects, and institutions, quite happy with a 13 to 15% equity IRR, and in the smaller scale utility and in larger kind of 10 to 12%. So the risk profile of has come down, and of course it's not a risk profile of Africa. It's everything is so different, right? And I think that's often a misconception when you're talking with investors from the West, is trying to demystify that Rwanda is completely different of a culture than its neighbor, and Kenya is so different of a risk profile than DRC or Cameroon versus South Africa, and Madagascar versus Botswana. And so certainly when we're tailoring platforms or groups, we have those types of geographies in mind. Where we see more kind of mature markets in Africa, whether that's South Africa or Uganda or Kenya, that has been able to kind of bring in really kind of robust measures on the regulatory frameworks, and there's a clear kind of track record of IPPs. The financiers have flooded into those markets, and there's a lot of available capital to do projects in those markets, but those markets often have a surplus of power already right now, and it's more of the frontier markets. So when we approach or look at trying to kind of create a tailored portfolio, if it's a U.S. impact fund that is trying to look for kind of an East African spread on hydro and solar, we might kind of cherry pick projects along different stages of development that's tailored to the return profile, risk profile that they're looking for. Some are looking for the more frontier markets. And so certainly this is where we're looking more in kind of Zimbabwe or DRC or Madagascar. Some are looking for a little bit of a mix in between. So it could be kind of Zambia, Uganda. So depending on that risk profile, and some are looking for impact around, today had a great call with WWF, and kind of, stands that there's going to be a significant movement in a kind of a post-COVID time, that it's a green recovery plan. And so anything that's really involving climate mitigation measures, anything that is can be used for protection of rainforests or of nature reserves. And so I think a lot of these kind of remote or renewable energy projects can be tailored around those types of platforms and projects and to the investors. So certainly we're not seeing kind of this standard thing that we saw 5 years ago. Okay, great, bring the project towards a PPA and then go and look for 5 or 10 different equity investors who might be out there. Actually, you're right from the very beginnings of developing and moving projects along. You're really doing that with the impact investor in mind, and trying to make products and packages, and so that risk profile is spread across. When you can cluster, then you get economies of scale on the same owner's engineer, on the same design firm, on the same potentially contractor if it's in the same area of the same electromechanical provider. There's structures of kind of guarantees that can be done in clusters where you're able to kind of drive down those development and project costs. On a hydropower front, you're really looking to try to get 3 million per megawatt and below. On a solar project, 1 million and below. And certainly, looking, and it's only through doing clusters that you can achieve that. And doing a kind of a one-off really doesn't lend itself to those savings, because you just have that. You need that level of management and oversight to develop a good, robust, long-term product.
And I am surmising that this is a lesson learned through 10 years of time, right? You've had your successes, you've stubbed your toe along the way, as every good developer should over time, right? I mean, you've learned your lessons, What would you say to that same line then is the biggest message that you want to put out to, we'll call it the potential, whether it be the climate change community, whether it be the Africa renewable energy, whether it be Africa industrialization for energy? What's the biggest message that you want to give to what EAP accomplishes in the energy sector in dealing with these different items?
That's also a big question. Certainly it's really kind of, so much of the messaging that's out there is hey, there's 660 million people without access to power. Right now it's 1.25 billion people spread across the continent. In the next 30 years, it's driving up to 2.5 billion. The number of resources needed to hit SDG 7 is like 500 billion. Over the next kind of 20 years it's $1 trillion market. And so much of the marketing and efforts and everything has been driven around off-grid. And while certainly, there's hundreds of millions that will be affected into the off-grid, the 93% of that capital in development and infrastructure is going to be for on-grid projects. And really, we're passionate about power that drives jobs. And not to say that we're not kind of passionate about getting rid of kerosene and seeing solar home systems and seeing mini grids develop. Mini grid business models are the most challenging thing that's out there and is dominating 50% of the marketing space out to the impact community. While I have a lot of kind of friends and colleagues in the mini grid or their solar home system, I certainly enjoy participating in those areas, perhaps more from a philanthropic angle. But certainly power to jobs, and certainly in looking at the future, it's really about looking at energy as the golden thread to every other SDG target. And so when investment happens in this level of infrastructure, it is just amazing kind of trickle effect. It's so catalytic for economic development and environmental sustainability issues and driving jobs. And the only way to kind of bring in manufacturing processing is to bring in more supply. And again, back to our argument is, do we want large projects? And yes, like there needs to be a multi-pronged approach out there. But what's so amazing about small scale projects in the 1 to 10 megawatts is that there's a significant value addition to local developers, right? Partnering with international, there's that technology is passed down. And so, if you were looking at the Rwandan market, 80% of it is dominated by local developers who over the last 10 years have been able to learn this space, become absolute experts in it. And now we see, Rwandan development companies, going abroad, lending their expertise right now in Zimbabwe and DRC. That kind of speaks volumes to the fact that it's about kind of training, capacity building, and solutions driven from African companies into this space. So while we're a bit of a hybrid, I think that message out to impact investors is to really reprioritize these small scale, hydro and solar because of the rural economic development that's driven in it. I mean, when you're bringing out these projects, there's roads, there's transmission lines. There's energy, and what are people going to do with that energy? I mean, they're going to start doing agri-processing. 95% of the places where these small projects are, they're sustenance farmers. And so when we're seeing more hybrid projects happen between, in the energy and ag space, I think we're going to see, tremendous amounts of innovation, where we see utilities of the future of integration of water, electricity, data, where we see mini grids and small scale projects beginning to interrupt with the national grids. And we're going to start seeing power trading. And over the next kind of 10 years, the obsession of securing your own right, least cost power development plan, and driving down the cost. Not all power is the same. And so again, back to, small scale hydro, everybody thinks, oh no, the best solution is solar batteries. Batteries aren't sustainable. This is not renewable. I mean, it's great technology and we're seeing a lot of kind of demand happen onto it, But go to most of the mines in Congo around the world and look at where those batteries come from. And, when those batteries have their used up life, how great are they for the environment? So while we are like pro, solar battery with what we do, we certainly kind of give our emphasis over to small scale run of the river hydropower projects. There's thousands to be done around the continent, and so much can be driven in for local jobs and employment in the construction of it. So that's a very long-winded response back to like where should priorities be. I think there's many other kind of developers in the field, and hydro has been given a lot of negative attention. Over the past 10 years, the International Hydropower Association has been, doing its best, but really, the solar companies and mini grid and solar home system, has dominated the the airwaves, if I could put it that way, to investors.
I appreciate your passion 100%, and I echo your sentiment towards the latter, catching fame. I mean, I think it's for ourselves. One of my statements early on, and I live by it today, is to say it's great to provide a light bulb at night, and that education is a valuable thing, but that only gives a glimpse of what could be, and eventually power for a job stops. Immigration to the cities and urban sprawl in Africa. It allows people to have jobs, like you said, with agriculture, with agricultural processing, being able to have a lot of the growth profile that can be, it allows it to be realized. It's very interesting what you're talking about with jobs as well, in that, last year, as you know, the AU, it was put down the guns, right? Was their theme for the African Union. And it was very much about creating jobs. And I truly don't think that the world as a whole understands the size of the opportunity. It's not a negative. It very much is a positive. The size of the opportunity that exists in the energy sector and the jobs that can come off and be created of that, innovative solutions from a business perspective like you have are very inspiring, like you said, to locals. And it just kind of keeps, as you said, roads, transmission lines, factories, all the other things that go on, even more so this year with the Continental Free Trade Agreement, that just allows for all kinds of opportunities. Yes, it's going to take time for them to develop, but somebody in your position is extremely well positioned to leverage, we'll call it international ears going forward, right? And with ears, hopefully there is also awareness, and awareness provides action, right, to the things that are going forward. The past is one thing. The opportunity we've talked about is another. Where do you see your company, East African Power, in 10 years? What's your dare to dream for what you are to, whether it be to Rwanda, whether it be to the Southern African Power Pool, whether it be to the watershed as a power? Where do you see East African Power in 10 years?
Great. Thanks for that question. When I first brought up to the team to say, okay, great. This is where we come in the next 10 years. Where do we want to be by 2030? And I think we can stand and visualize. And I not to say dare to dream. I believe that we are going to realize this, and we're driven it and wake up every single day excited about realizing that 1 gigawatt and seeing that development not happen across 10 projects, but actually happen across 100 projects. We see probably 50% of those projects still being in the solar, still being in the hydro, where we have our more of our historical expertise, 50% in solar. We may dabble and look into biomass or wind, but that's, we'll see when we get there. But certainly between those two technologies, they'll dominate. We see tremendous kind of development for kind of corporate PPAs, captive power agreements, especially in the mini to small areas. So we'll see probably 50% of our projects actually being on private PPAs with companies, institutions, that are looking for more reliable power and often trying to kind of get off the dependence of a grid that might not be 100% clean energy also. We'd see probably a nice breakdown of almost an equal between mini, small, and medium-sized projects. So it's about 1/3 each that we have kind of targeted off over the next 10 years. So meaning that often when we approach into markets, we like to begin in the mini and small space, and of course we're looking opportunistically at the larger, medium, up to 50 megawatts typically. But we'll see ourselves, wanting to get that experience. When I say, do we dare to dream? Actually, we view that probably we'll have kind of 5 to 10 kind of core equity impact partners or groups that we've tailored platforms with. Types of relationships that we've had with different, specific private equity, we see those kind of going and growing. And what's nice is when you're doing 2 to 3 projects with one fund, you're typically going to add in, 1 or 2 other projects. You typically use that platform then to acquire and step into other projects. From a sizing of the company, I don't think that our strategy and of course being fully integrated, development, financing, engineering, construction, operations and maintenance, and asset management, I still think we're going to stick to that being fully integrated along the value chain. So that being said, are we going to be providing the O&M to every single project that we develop? No. If we did that, we'd have 1,000 employees just in operations and maintenance. But certainly we do want to hit that 1,000 mark for full-time employees. And we see the company being entirely African run and managed. I'm on my way out in 5 years and would love to, play my role as a founder and chairman, active business development with the team. But certainly we see us being able to hit off our gender diversity gaps within the next 5 years. So really EAP being an African run company, working on projects that are not just in one geography. And the other diversification, of course, is to have clusters or portfolios in 10 different geographies. And certainly we have key areas where we've had our historic strength, of course, in East Africa, and we're able to provide a lot of the engineering services in those areas. But of course, the growth potential over the next 5 years, clearly in the Southern African Power Pool, where there's an existing energy gaps, and then we'll see ourselves come more into the Central African Power Pool, and then maybe in the later end of the decade, Western African Power Pool. So that kind of natural evolving over the decade is that the minimum target is 1 gigawatt, the minimum target is 100 projects, minimum target is 10 countries. We are really enthusiastic about being EAP, being that partner of choice. So really it's about partnering with local developers that might not have brought the project already up to financial close, us being the partner to the impact funds, us being a partner with the utilities that we're working with, and us with the local communities. I think what has attracted 75% of the people in our senior management team is we don't even come from, let's say, a background of being very, very excited about kilowatt hours. We're excited about what kilowatt hours can do. And I think that has been kind of the driving force of the grit and resilience needed to drive through the issues and problems that naturally come in development. So we're really excited about these projects being able to be significantly beneficial, not only in meeting the IFC and World Bank standards, what is written into our environmental and social management plans, but it's about doing plus. So, what does this mean for ensuring that around each project we have universal access power, energy access? What does it mean about environmental sustainability and offering best practices? And then what does it mean for economic empowerment and seeing kind of our sister organization Empowering Villages, which is more about providing in those off-grid or rural development through Empower Hubs for driving small businesses. That's also like what wakes us up in the day. Like we're really excited about those projects, those relationships that we're building, and that capacity building. So what we've looked like in the last 10 years and where we're going in the next 10, I think that kind of paints a picture of where we're going in the next 10, but we have 2050 in our target. So not only do we have where we want to be in the next 10 years, we certainly are looking at the projects in the company to where we'll be playing into 2050. Because in 2050, the population across the continent is going to be 2.5 billion. And I think when people look at, Africa like risk, no, Africa opportunity. I think it's the most beautiful continent in the world. Beautiful places, culture, environment, and of course, we're just really excited about of course the demand trajectory, with the economic development that will take place. So we find ourselves in the right place at the right time, and we've got 2050 on our mind.
And with that, I think there is no better way to close our discussion. I think that that summarizes the excitement that you bring and that you've built in your company and that we share at Stonechair, working alongside you as part of this process. So Dan, thanks so much for taking this time this afternoon to discuss these things. And I look forward to working with you in the future.
Likewise, looking forward to work with you also. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you're in Kigali. Come by for a great cup of coffee. Swing by the office. And we're just excited to partner with yourselves and others who are just interested and equally passionate about driving SDG 7. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Energy and Africa. I'm your host, Chris McLean. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, stonechaircapital.com, to your friends and colleagues. And please, leave us a positive review on all your social platforms. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts and videos. Check us out on Twitter and LinkedIn. Details are all on the show notes. Join us next time for another edition of Energy and Africa.